At the edge of the chalice, spirituality is rooted in connection. Connection to self, to others, to the earth and all its beings. Spirituality is not an idea, it is experience. In connection, dividing lines disappear. Inner conflict way to integrity. We become one. We walk the same earth. We drink the same water. We breathe the same air. Come, let us celebrate this miracle of life together. Come, let us connect. Now this morning, for our story for all ages, I'm going to tell a story that's a retelling of a very old story, and I think you'll recognize it. Water. Water rising and rising, rolling over the steps of the house, seeping over the wooden floor. He stands by the kitchen table, holding a bowl in his hand, staring as the water sweeps up around his ankles. The bowl in his hand grows larger and larger, but he hardly notices. He looks towards the doorway and sees a wave bursting in. He opens his mouth to shout. Noah woke up in a sweat, his wife Zillah patting his face. It was the dream again? Noah managed to nod. This drought is terrible, but only you could imagine that water would be worse. Zillah smiled. Go outside, silly old man. See how dry it is out there. You will be glad of the rains when they come. Noah got up and went to sit on the doorstep. It was dry, terribly dry. Grass was brown, the cattle were gaunt. Only a few vegetables were thriving, ones planted in the shade of trees. Noah leaned back and looked up at the stars, clear and bright in the sky. Build an ark. Noah blinked. As he looked at the stars, the bowl from his dream appeared in his mind or the sky, he couldn't tell. The bowl grew larger and turned into a great ship. Build an ark. Noah shook his head. Build an ark? What kind of crazy idea was that? Build an ark. He was a farmer and not a very good one. What did he know about arks? He shrugged uneasily as he got up from the steps and went back to bed. Over the next few days, Noah grew more and more silent, telling no one of his experiences. Every night he dreamed of the rising waters, and every time he awoke, he thought of the great ship. On the seventh night, his wife Zillah yelled out, and Noah woke to find her staring at him, frightened. The dream! I had the dream too. Her face was pale, then puzzled. An ark, she said. The next day, Noah and Zillah sat at the table and began to sketch the plans. The ship's form came quickly, as if the building knowledge had been in their minds all along and just needed a small push to the surface. The day after that, Noah and Zillah began collecting the timber. Within a few days, word had gotten around that they were behaving strangely, and their son, Ham, stopped by, as did their other two sons. Noah's granddaughter ran over to him as he sawed wood. You're building the ark. I'm so glad. I couldn't make mine big enough. The whole family worked together, the sons and their wives and the children sleeping in the dusty barn so they could start as soon as they woke up and push themselves till late in the night. Once in a while, one of them would ask, why are we building this crazy big thing? We don't need so much room. And Noah would only nod and say, it is what is needed. The children noticed them first. The grown-ups were busy, so the children took care of them, finding them safe places to sleep in the barn, making sure there was enough food for all of them. At first, it was just the smaller animals, squirrels, raccoons, mice, foxes. They were easy enough to look after, although the cats did not make the mice welcome. It was the elephants that the grown-ups finally noticed. "What," said Noah, "is that?" "An elephant," said Rachel. "An elephant?" said Noah. "An elephant," said Rachel. "For the ark, grandfather. All the animals are coming too." Noah looked at the little girl. "For the ark? And how do you know they're for the ark?" And Rachel smiled. "I just do. All the children do. That's why all the animals are here. And the birds too." Noah looked up from the wood and the timber and looked around his property. Beside the hulking form of the partially built ark were animals everywhere. Now that he was looking, he looked up into the woods behind the house and could see the animals in there too, in the shadows of the trees, waiting. And the sky was filled with birds swooping and soaring. He sighed. "I guess we better start gathering seeds and plants as well." Many people came by to see Noah's ark. Some stayed and helped and then wandered off again. Others stayed and kept on helping. But most came by and went away quickly, smiling and shaking their heads. An ark in a drought. What a foolish notion. And yet every night they too dreamed of water pouring into their homes. Rumors were everywhere. It seemed that every town had a mad family or two building an ark. But Noah's people had no time for listening to rumors. They simply worked on, finishing the ark, gathering food, taking care of the animals, collecting plants and seeds. And after many days, all dry, all dusty, they finished the big wooden ship and opened up the door and put out the ramp. A cat who had been sunning itself strolled up the ramp first. Smaller animals scampered in quickly. Once the plants in big pots were placed on the deck, the birds and butterflies and bees came too. And Noah had even brought in some young trees, so large he planted them right in the deck of the ship, with deep vaults of soil which carried the earthworms and the insects. The larger animals waited. Noah and his family and all the people who had helped walked up the ramp with their pillows and blankets and bags. Zillah was last. "My poor house," she cried. "How I have loved it here." And as she stands on the ramp, crying for her home, the larger animals come out of the woods and the fields, and the lions stop beside her, holding her up like golden boulders. And Zillah sniffs and turns, puts her hands on their back, and together they walk into the ark. The world is in crisis. The way it is now is not the way it will be soon. Build an ark to survive. Bring not just your family, but the birds and bees, plants and trees and the animals, as many as you can. Everyone is having the dream. Everyone is hearing the call to build the ark, but few are moved to action. Noah's Ark is just a myth, an echo of older flood stories from older Mediterranean cultures, which may or may not have arisen from actual experiences of sudden flooding. Noah's Ark is a myth, but myths have meaning, and this myth feels more and more relevant today. The world is in crisis. The way it is now is not the way it will be soon. Build an ark together to survive. And there's a man in Scotland right now who agrees. David Blair has built a giant boat frame in a farmer's field in Scotland. Huge, the timbers stand as a symbol of strength and urgency as we head towards another international conference on climate that's happening in Glasgow in November. And David expected, once it was done, that he was going to put up signs to explain the symbolism. But it turns out that the people stopping and visiting understand full well that the Ark is speaking to the climate crisis. He hasn't had to put up any signs at all, because we know that story and we know what it means. We need to build arks to survive. Arks that bring aboard neighbors and strangers, birds, animals, plants that protect them against the coming changes. Noah and his family created a vessel of interdependence within which all lived together, sailing over those turbulent seas into a new world. Build an ark. Many people are hearing this call today, and many are heeding it. There's no one singular ark, one person who's going to save us all. There's no one way to do it. People all over the world are responding. There are people in Hamilton right now digging up pavements and sidewalks and planting trees to green urban spaces and reduce the heat sink of the city. And many arcs like this are needed to reduce these carbon emissions as quickly as possible to protect the biodiversity of life on Earth as temperatures rise. Good change is happening, and it's a challenge because so much of this work does need to be done by governments, corporations, and banks, and they'll only do it if we make them. Arc thinking requires a mindset of interdependence, recognition from all of us that we're in this together. And as Unitarian Universalists, we have our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And that seventh principle, for me, is the essence of being a person of the chalice in this century. The acceptance that we all belong to the earth, that we're part of this much greater, grander, life-enriching whole. And it's so key to Canadian Unitarian Universalism that it's echoed in our national vision, which says we seek a world in which our interdependence calls us to love and justice. This theology of connection is a gateway to the future. It is in itself an ark, a container which will carry us forward into those stormy seas to come. It's a theology that tells us we're all connected, which is both a profound spiritual truth and a completely mundane and obvious fact. We are all connected. COVID-19 has shown us this painfully and at times beautifully as people care for each other. So we live knowing we're interdependent, but how do we live in a way that encourages healthy connections, supports the vulnerable, most fragile parts of the web, changes that rise in carbon emissions? There are practical individual choices each one of us make that together grow into great, big, beautiful trees. Whether that's choosing local food or LED lighting, all the things we do to help lighten our footprint on the planet accumulate and grow. And the choices we've made as a community matter too, from our low flow faucets in the bathrooms to the reusable dishes for our once and sometime in the future coffee hour. I'm very proud of the work we did to become a green sanctuary so that we could better live our seventh principle. And we are a sanctuary. It shows in the beauty of this great hall and in the beauty of the gardens and in the care of this community for one another. And the work is not over. We continue to learn how to live into this theology of how to begin from a stance of connection. And it's hard to figure out. And strangely, I think one of the paths is actually mindfulness. My colleague Julie Stolenberg notes, to become more mindful is to live with the awareness that we are constantly being influenced by all that interacts with us, and that simultaneously we are influencing and affecting all with which we interact. There is a give and take to existence constantly. And what happens next, tomorrow, next year, next millennium, depends on the ways we interact with all things and beings today. So it matters, and it matters greatly, that we practice compassionate and accountable interdependence. So as people of the chalice, we can be mindful. We pay attention to the ways in which we influence and affect not just people, but the environment. And that led us to our Green Sanctuary work. And being mindful, it takes time. Time to observe, time to ask questions, to pay attention to answers, to understand the impact of all we do. It's intentional. And so I believe the seventh principle in part asks us to slow down to the speed of relationships, to slow down and consider the impacts of what we do now for generations to come. How would this chalice community act in the coming years if our decisions were based not just on our current needs, but on the needs of the planet and the next generations? And it feels strange, I will say, to suggest that to live our seventh principle is to slow down when we're living in this climate crisis that should have been addressed 30 years ago, and there's such urgency to it. And as Greta Thunberg said this week to world leaders, of course we need constructive dialogue, but they've now had 30 years of blah, 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 and where has that led us? But as she reminds us, we can still turn this around. It's entirely possible. It takes immediate, drastic annual emission reductions. But we can do it. We just have to build the arcs. And so it's a shift in thinking to go slow, to go fast. Slow down and make mindful decisions based on the needs of the planet and future generations, and advocate for drastic and immediate actions by governments. We want to put our attention less on ourselves and more on others. To let community be more about our own, meeting our own needs. To focus on those big issues, to listen to those stories. We not be dreaming every night of the waters rising. We not be called by God to build an ark. But if you open the newspapers, if you listen to the media, the call is there. And this, of course, is hard to do. And we will feel like hypocrites. We will struggle, feeling awkward and uncomfortable making these choices, trying to live as best we can in this moment of crisis. But I think UCM is one of the places that can figure it out, to learn together how to make decisions for the long term, to make mistakes and get it wrong and try again. We have our 7 principles to guide us. We have the spiritual discipline of mindfulness to slow us down, and we have the community of learning together. And we have the power to help not just ourselves, but the web of all life. In a little while, Susan is going to talk about the good work at the Mississauga Climate Action Group, which advocates at municipal and regional levels for concrete carbon emission reductions right here, right now. UU Minister Tim de Christopher says, principled action is the salvation of the soul. When we live by our values, when we live the theology of interdependence embedded in the 7th principle, we help heal the web of life. We are already an ark, a green sanctuary of hope, and that matters. As we live into this climate crisis, people will need this chalice community. We'll need UCM to be a place of restoration, a place where people can come in despair and find their way back to hope, place where people can be recalled to their values and find a way to hold fast to them, a place where stories, new visions can be told. Stories of that web of life where each creature and plant, all of life has a role to play, has inherent worth and dignity. So let us cherish this place for the restoration of hurting souls that include our own. And when we are rested and return to our principles, may we go out into the world to help build those necessary arcs. The world is in crisis. The way it is now is not the way it will be soon. Build an ark to survive. Bring not just your family, but the birds and bees, the plants and trees and the animals, as many as you can. Everyone is having the dream. Everyone is hearing the call to build the ark, but not everyone is moved to action. May we be some of the people moved to action. May we listen to that call. May we choose the path of interdependence. May we find ways to be mindful, to go slow and restore connections. May we help build those arcs carry us into this beautiful future that can await us if we try. So say we all.